I love mountain trekking and often venture into the hills and peaks where strange things tend to happen. Let me share a few stories I've experienced or collected from acquaintances. These are tales of mysterious creatures. Here's a story from an acquaintance. He claims to have seen a hairy black creature. It was the middle of the night, and he was resting in a tent with his party when they were all awakened by the sound of something rustling through their belongings outside. They slowly raised their upper bodies and exchanged glances in the darkness of the tent. Someone whispered, "Hey, could it be a bear?" It would have been their first encounter with a bear. They hadn't anticipated such an event and had carelessly left food and other items outside. They thought, "We messed up. Did the smell of food lure it here?" Everyone was tense, holding their breath. Just then, a deep male voice came from outside. Nothing worth taking here." "What? A thief?" Surprised, they opened the entrance and jumped out of the tent, only to find a large, hairy, black creature. Its body and movements were just like a bear's. However, in the middle of its head was a pale human face. This unidentifiable creature, paying no attention to them, rummaged through their backpacks, then turned to face them, grinned, and disappeared into the mountains. It moved on all fours, like a bear. Only the sweet emergency rations like chocolate and honey were missing. Needless to say, they didn't sleep a wink that night and descended the mountain at dawn the next morning. Another story from an acquaintance. This one's about what you might call a kind of yokai, or supernatural creature. It happened quite a while ago when he stayed at a relative's house in a mountain village. This relative was a hunter, but at the time he was observing a period of abstinence from entering the mountains, as if he had violated a sacred taboo. According to his relative, it was because he had killed a hihisaru. Hihisaru, could it mean a baboon-like monkey? "Are there baboons in Japan?" he asked in surprise. The relative's answer went something like this. A hihisaru isn't a baboon, but rather a term for a yokai that an old monkey transforms into after many years. It's probably a name unique to this valley. I don't know what they call it in other regions, or if it appears elsewhere. But since it's an old monkey that transforms, I suppose it could appear in any mountain. The name isn't fixed. Some call it just hihi, while others call it onisaru. They say that because a hihi is a yokai, it won't die even if shot with guns or arrows. It's said to devour all the animals in the mountains and eventually perish on its own. It's a kind of monkey god, so village lore used to warn against harming it. However, this hihisaru once kidnapped a baby from the village. Because of this incident, now they quickly eliminate any hihi that appears. Since guns and arrows can't harm a hihi, they use fire to destroy it. With help from hunters from neighboring villages, they surround the hihi with torch-bearing hunters and a pack of hunting dogs, douse it with oil, and burn it to death. This time it was this relative who poured oil on the cornered hihi and set it on fire. That's why he was observing a period of abstinence, as if he had killed a mountain god. When a hihi dies, game becomes scarce in the mountains for a while. This state is called yama-are, meaning the mountain has become desolate. The relative, who was a hunter, told him this while ladling out miso soup made only with wild mountain vegetables. Yet another story from an acquaintance. This too is likely about a kind of yokai. His grandfather was a charcoal burner. These days, with the widespread use of fossil fuels, there are hardly any places that use charcoal, but back then, charcoal burning was a winter job for farmers. One cold night, while he was tending the fire at the charcoal burn, a voice called out from the darkness. "It's cold. May I come over there?" The grandfather, thinking it was someone from the village, answered, "Of course, come on over." Then an unfamiliar figure emerged from the darkness. It was about the size of an adult, its entire body covered in coarse black hair. Seeing the face, so covered in hair that he couldn't make out the eyes or nose, the grandfather nearly collapsed in shock. The hairy creature, noticing the grandfather's reaction, cried out sadly, "Ah, as I thought, You too think I'm ugly?" With that, it turned its back and ran off into the mountains. The grandfather was so surprised that he couldn't utter a word throughout the encounter. Later, as he recalled the event, he felt a pang of sympathy for the slightly hunched back of that hairy creature as it ran away. He thought that if it ever came again, he would welcome it warmly, but the hairy creature never returned. Here's a story from my aunt. She was quite brave and often ventured into the mountains alone. This happened when she went to see the autumn leaves in a valley. As she was walking along a narrow path where no one else passed, she heard a sound coming from behind the trees. It sounded like something was being dug up, but it lacked the characteristic roughness of an animal digging. She thought, "It's rare to meet someone in a place like this," and quietly peeked through the trees. There, in the shadows a little way off, she saw a large ape-like back covered in hair digging at the base of a tree. It was a beast she had never seen before, with a back larger than a bear's. Even my usually brave aunt felt uneasy about being alone at that moment. She thought, "If I'm attacked here, there's no way I could escape or stand a chance." Then, as if reading her mind, the voice spoke, "I won't attack you. I don't eat meat." Stunned that it could speak, she stood frozen as it stood up and turned around. It had the body of a giant ape nearly 7 feet tall, with the face of a middle-aged man. Leaving her standing there in shock, it walked away calmly. In its hand it held a long, wild yam it had just dug up. Here's a story from my own experience. I was walking in the foothills, picking edible bracken ferns I had found. When I looked up after finishing, I suddenly noticed a bird crouching right in front of me. It was a slightly large white chicken. Its face and comb were also white, giving it an eerie appearance. Thinking someone might have abandoned it in the mountains, I offered it some ferns. The white chicken pecked at the fern tips, swallowed them, and then let out a loud cry. The sound was unlike anything I'd expect from a chicken, or even a bird. It barked twice with a deep voice like a large dog, "Bow wow!" and then howled long like a dog. As I stood there wide-eyed with surprise, the white chicken turned on its heel and disappeared into the mountains. Its rear view was also bizarre, with a thick, white, snake-like tail hanging down, swaying gently from side to side. Speaking of chickens, here's another story. This happened when I went for a hike in the lower mountains. I encountered a man hurriedly coming down the mountain. He said, "It might be better to call it off today. It's dangerous." This man had been walking on an animal trail in a nearby copse when he heard something heavy running up the slope from the ravine below. Thinking it might be a wild boar, he quickly climbed a nearby tree. Just then, the source of the footsteps appeared. It was a gigantic chicken, about as tall as an adult, with brown feathers. The chicken seemed agitated and was kicking the surrounding trees indiscriminately. For a while, dull thuds echoed through the woods. Eventually, it let out an eerie growl unlike any bird sound and ran off towards the upper ridge. The tree he had been clinging to was all scratched up. He was too scared to climb down for a while. He said he felt like he had narrowly escaped death as he ran away. Seeing my half-doubting attitude, the man said, "Well, it's just over there. Go see the kick marks before you judge." So we decided to go back to the scene together. The man was visibly nervous throughout the walk, which was quite pitiful to see. When we reached the spot he pointed out, I was speechless as I looked around at the trees. There were deep gouges in the trunks here and there. Bark was scattered all around. Looking in the direction he said it had run off, there was a trail of disturbed fallen leaves that looked like footprints. Claw marks were visible on the ground. Following the man's advice, I decided to call off my hike that day. Here's a story from an acquaintance. It might be about some kind of plague god. It happened when he was cutting bamboo in his mountain property. He heard the sound of a dog barking from within the bamboo grove. He looked around but couldn't see any dogs anywhere. Yet, he could still hear the dog's voice. Worried that he might be surrounded by wild dogs, he held his hatchet at the ready and looked around. The dog's barking seemed to come from a few yards away, but there was nothing there. When he approached that spot, the barking would start from a different direction. That's how it went, he said. When he told this story at the local pub, an old man he knew muttered, "So, the Basa Basa has appeared. A pandemic is coming." That winter, an unidentified contagious disease spread through the village. Another story from an acquaintance, he claims to have seen a mysterious river crab. While he was fishing in a mountain stream, he discovered a hidden pool. The entire pool was conveniently covered by trees in a dome-like shape, making it easy to miss and pass by without noticing. There, he found a strange river crab. Its shell had a pattern he had never seen before, and its belly was full of eggs. As he watched, thinking it was a rare species, the eggs quickly hatched into baby crabs while still attached to the mother's belly, and immediately devoured the mother crab. The small crabs grew rapidly and soon began to cannibalize each other. This continued until only one was left, which then immediately began carrying many eggs in its belly. The eggs quickly hatched into baby crabs. This bizarre cycle repeated endlessly, as if he was watching a video on fast forward. He lost himself, absorbed in this mysterious spectacle. He's not sure how long he watched. He came to his senses when he felt hungry and left the pool. Surprisingly, hardly any time had passed. Strangely, all the metal he was wearing, his belt buckle, the arms of his polarized glasses, was lightly rusted. His knife, tackle box, and fishing gear were no exception, all lightly rusted. Only his wristwatch showed no signs of rust at all.